information that will help the project and help not only frame the project, but take away some of this paperwork that we end up doing. You know, when we're doing business requirements are often, I suppose, subject to, long documents or all of these sticky boards, and they're quite hard to see what's happening. So the idea with the knowledge brief was, and it is something that I've used locally in the Christchurch City Council and in several businesses. It is something that I developed based on some inspiration from lean manufacturing. And I found personally, and I hopefully other people feel the same, that it's been very helpful. So just, some notes. So in essence, we are change agents. This is what we do as business analysts. And so as we do the knowledge brief, I want you to think of yourself not as a business analyst, but as a investigative journalist. So take off the hats that you have currently, your job title, your role, just take that off, and let's look at what the what would it be if you were an investigative journalist who is now exploring a project and looking at what would that project look like. What is the story? What is cutting edge that you want to share with the business. All right, so let me just turn slides here. So a little update from my last session. I've added some Babok references in here, but they're not exhaustive, and they're not prescriptive, but it's just to give you a little bit of idea where you can find the information. I do like to provide access to information. Now, we start off with a knowledge brief, and this, I think Paul mentioned that this is a 3-part series. So the knowledge brief we are going to be discussing is this part, which is part 1, which is understanding what are we trying to achieve. And we look at 4 key areas. So we look at the background, and this is where, if you have been studying Babok, you'll understand what BACM, I call, is, which is your business analysis core concept model, which focuses on a broad idea of what it is that you're looking at without leaning it to one area. So we look at what is the need, we look at what is the solution, what is the change, the stakeholders, the value, and the context. And context is probably the most important part in looking at part 1 of our knowledge brief. So we'll start off with the background statement. And the background statement, as I mentioned, and actually I got challenged by really good BA, Stefan. Are we writing a background statement that is, like a project statement? And the answer is no. What we try to do with our background statement is to create context. Now, I want to add that everything in the knowledge brief is flexible. So it's not saying you have to do part 1 or you have to do, this box 1 first. It's advised, because that's why it's called 1. But you will find as you go through a project, things will change and things will move. So don't think of this as a, project plan that says this is what we're going to do and this is what we're going to go forward. No, you're an investigative journalist and you are wanting to understand what is the story that you'll be telling. And the story will involve multiple factors. I just want to see if I can change my setting, because I can't see any comments or anything. Apologies, Paul.
You don't worry about the comments. If I see something, I'll mention it to you.
because I
Fine.
can't see anyone's faces or anything. But yes, if you don't mind just interrupting me.
I will do
Um,
so. Go for
okay,
it.
awesome, great. Okay, so um, the idea with the design as well is actually quite important. I wanted it to be simple enough that you can put it onto a dashboard or you can put it onto a PowerPoint presentation, at a minimum, and you could talk to any stakeholder at the level of abstraction that's necessary. So those are lovely fancy words that Babak loves to use, abstraction. And this basically means, do we talk high level, which is usually your executive team, or do we talk details? And so the idea with the knowledge brief was to be able to really break down the background in a particular area and then provide supplementary information if it was required. Next. So, what is the background statement? Well, it's about, what is the need what's the context? Now, when you write a background statement, so let's assume, and I'll give you an example. We are going to be working in, just working through very loosely a project. And so, what is the context of the change? So, why do we need to change? Um, so, if you're going to, I often use a house, I might use a different example today. But if you are going to be changing or renovating your house, you want to understand what's the background of the idea behind what you're doing. Who is affected? When were they affected? When did we first notice a particular need or a change? And who do we need to work with to provide a solution? So the background really frames the whole knowledge brief. And when you write a background statement, so like any good journalist, you don't want to be kind of prescribing the story. You don't want to come in with a story already in your head. You want to discover the story. So you want to know, okay, who are we working with? So what happened at this particular stage? And how does this all, how did we end up in the position that we've ended up in? So this is what a background statement is. It needs to be short, concise. So it needs to follow those principles that we talk about with requirements, which is, not necessarily atomic, but concise. It's clear. It's understandable. It is not intended to be academic paper. It's not intended to be very specific to only one single audience. And what I mean by that is often we use acronyms and we use, descriptions that are not relatable to people. So when you go to a user and you go, acronym ABC and acronym, it's not very helpful to the end user. So you want anybody to be able to read your newspaper article. And the same goes for your background statement. So let's look at what a background statement. Now, this I've said before is probably the most boring part of our presentation. So just bear with me because I've now got to tell a story.
Sorry, Deirdre, if I may just quickly
Yes,
interrupt you there.
yeah.
Letitia asks, well, she put an acronym TKB ?
The knowledge brief.
There we go.
And I've just said don't use acronyms. Good spotting, Letitia. All right. So the knowledge brief, as I mentioned, you should not be putting your own opinion into it. And anybody who reads this, it should be understandable. And the frame, the story needs to be well understood. So it's like a synopsis. So I'm going to start with a little bit of the story. So imagine in New Zealand we've got a company and it's called Property Plus. And Property Plus has been around for since 1992, with a vision of not merely wanting to achieve growth and profits, but also make worthwhile contribution to the development of our city and our country. And Property Plus has a long and proud history of creating places that meet the needs of customers and communities. And currently they're employing over 900 people in 40 locations. And they continue to expand. So even though they originated in New Zealand, they have now gone beyond the boundaries of New Zealand. To justify that, because 40 locations would be hard. Over the years of expansion, Property Plus has managed its financial data and reporting systems, and these systems have increased across the group as each department built reporting solutions to cater for their own needs. So you can imagine you've now got the sales department, and this is back in the 90s, when Windows 93 just came out. Yeah, it was 93, just came out. And so they've been building all of these different systems, different spreadsheets, etc. And as a result, the company reporting is now done using a mixture of outdated technology platforms like JB Edwards and inventory as an inventory and reporting system, but also built on systems like Microsoft Access and Microsoft Excel and complex macros. So I don't think that this is a surprise to many. There are still companies like this. And then we have recently the project implemented a new CRM system to manage leasing and sales that provides modern interface operating via the corporate intranet. The CRM system interfaces with existing finance and reporting. And let me find my words. It also contains a whole new set of data fields developed to improve the management of the retail and the office centers. These new data sets are only held in the CRM system and are not passed to the old systems. And the data logic maps and data dictionary are out of date, and this is caused issues across the group. Now, look at that. That's the simple background statement. You could basically present that in a better way, and I'm going to just show you some tricks. And actually, I don't want to call them tricks. I want to say this is what you should be doing as a VA. So first thing is you want to investigate. What is the story, right? So we want to look at different components of our story. So this is a simple thing that every BA can do. When we talk about business analysis, you can, find information and requirements, not just through interviews and user stories, but you can do research. You can look at documentation. There's multiple ways in which you can obtain information that's relevant. So for those, I know there's a couple of people here that are part of my program, but I always say, really BAs are the conduit of information. We're not there to document requirements. And this is an important understanding. So if we just highlighted some key things, and in our knowledge brief in part 2, we discussed requirements. So I need you to just bear in mind we won't go into that detail, but we look at what would be high-level business requirements. So we have, basically, if we said, okay, what are the needs? And we highlighted them. And we said, what are the systems they're working with? And we highlighted them. And what's the reporting issues? Highlighted. So this is a simple way, and there are some really nice research tools out there. I had people ask me after the last session, so Paul, I'll probably send you a link so that you can have a look at that. But we want to know, we want to be able to break down the information. So not only should you be writing it or co-writing it with some key, business SMEs, and I'd probably say it's domain subject matter experts, but you want to keep it concise. You don't want to have, this is what we're going to do in the future after this. you want to also identify some key areas that would potentially in the future be defined as requirements. So for instance, if I was to read, let's say, the purple area, currently employing over 900 people with over 40 locations, Property Plus continues to expand. The departments have built reporting solutions to cater for their own needs, causing issues across the group. Now, how cool is that? I can now look at the stakeholders' requirements, and I can look at the need and the problem that we're dealing with. We could look at our reporting. So simple ways in which we can analyze the information that we have and start to build a case and start to understand, is this enough information? Have we missed some key points? Have we looked at things like security? Have we looked at things like, let's say, privacy? Are we missing some components? So remember, when we write this background statement, we're not trying to write what they should have. We want to write what they do have. And we don't want to write about the entire organization and all the, history, but we want to create the context of the, what we're trying to achieve in our change. And I use the word change because when we talk about strategy, not strategy projects, that's assuming it's already been done. And so that's not what we're doing here. We are wanting to understand why we want to change. What is the rationale behind that? So just recapping our background statement, base it on facts. We want to ensure that we've got the right information for the people that we're working with. We've done some investigation, so we're not only doing it once or twice. And this, writing a background statement is not easy. You have to practice this. This is not something that you can just wing in a day. And so I advise you to go to other BAs and ask them to critique your background statement. Ask them to give you some feedback on what you've written and have you written it nicely, or well, should I say. Here's a quote, so I'm just going to read it for you. So inventor Charles Kettling famously said, and this is to the next session, a problem well stated is half solved. So we're going to move from our background to our problem statement. So why do we separate the two? And let's just go into the next one. Teams is orientated a little bit differently into Zoom, so I kind of have to navigate a little bit. So a problem statement, so a problem half stated or a problem well stated is half done is a great way to understand the importance of being able to define what the problem is or the opportunity. And sometimes, people ask, well, why would you have a problem or opportunity? Like, surely when we're trying to do a change or we're trying to incorporate, a business transformation, this isn't necessarily an opportunity. But I want to remind you that you've got options. Like, for instance, let's say somebody in the organization goes, well, if we were to maybe just, look at this in a different way or create a different form for our customers, we would save all of this time. And that's what we would term an opportunity. So it's something to explore. And so just like an investigative journalist, you are going to be exploring that opportunity. So what do you need to have in order to market, sell, or develop your solution? Now, what would you write in terms of a problem or opportunity? So the first thing you want to do is describe the problem. Now, a problem statement is not a whole analysis. It's around stating the problem in a simple way, again, that people can understand. So you would describe the problem, you would include criteria for measuring the extent of the problem. So how big is this problem? Describe the area impacted by the problem. Include any negative consequences relating to the problem. And you would do a similar thing. So however you started coding, and by the way, there's two ways in which you can code. And by coding, I'm not talking about necessarily programming, but I do think that you can look at coding from, you can have what they call is kind of find, discover key highlights, or you can, I'm just trying to think of the term, it's just evaded me this minute, or you can, come with prerequisites of search options that you're looking for, or you could do both. I think it's deductive, inductive, and reasoning. Yes. So what you can do is you can start off with a premise of what it is that you're trying to find out regarding the problem, and then you can start discovering through what you're reading and what you've researched what that particular issue is that you're dealing with. So next we look at our Property Plus. So the Property Plus has a large team in a financial department. This is the problem statement: managing multiple systems, databases, complex spreadsheets. So a similar process would apply. Anything that you've highlighted, you should be able to read independently, and you should be able to analyze that. So a large team in financial department, no longer meeting the needs of various stakeholders. So even though you're writing the story, you're actually breaking this down into almost like mini user stories. And they're not necessarily user stories, but they're written in a similar way, and they will potentially be part of your business requirements. So I don't want to prescribe that at this stage, but the idea is that you can start using, again, this information and analyze it, investigate it, look at what are the things that you have, what are you missing. So for instance, in our previous slide, we had data. Is data meant to be part of the problem? Have we missed that out? Why aren't we relating our data in here? Again, like I mentioned, security. Is security a problem? So in the context of what we're trying to achieve, we talk about reporting, but we've got all these Excel spreadsheets, we've got all of the, we've got these JD software programs, and now we want to put it all into CRM. There's a lot of things we want to investigate here that might not be, fully covered. And another thing I just want to add is, as you go through your problem statement, you will be going back and looking at your background and going, oh, hang on, we raised a problem here, but we didn't bring in the context, we didn't bring in the background. So as I mentioned, this won't be a fixed thing that you'll do once and you'll never update it. But what you want to do is you want to keep it short and simple. You don't want to write a novel. You want people to understand the information, right? Who wants to? It's like, just think of it as a, I suppose, a trailer of what the project might be. Okay, so that's problem, background. Don't know if anyone has any questions before we go into critical success factors.
Yeah, Deirdre, there's been a bit of chatter around the peer reviews. Quite a few organizations are doing those peer reviews. So we might have a question or two of that later on.
Okay, sweet. Okay, next we're going to look at critical success factors. Now, this is a real bugbear with me, particularly with business analysts, because you should be good at business analysts, and good business analysts should be able to measure the things. And as I said in my past session, I had a boss that I reported to, and he always asked me, every time I did any work, he said, how do you measure it? He drove me nuts, but he was 100% correct because otherwise these are just ideas or just thoughts, and we don't know how to, to necessarily do them correctly. So what are critical success factors? So this is different again from a project management, and this is what I think is so important, because although this will be probably part of a business scope document or a business case or a project charter, all of these things matter. The knowledge brief is to bring this information into a cohesive way. And one of the critical things are that we need to be able to measure what success looks like. I'll go back to the house. You can say you want a house, and you can say you want it to be cool, and you can say you want to have 4 bedrooms, but if you can't measure it, what are you building? How does that actually work? So these are very important components of understanding what your, what is going to ensure that you're getting from current state or the problem to the future state. And so although we do go through current and future state in part 2 and 3 of our knowledge brief, we want to have some loose measures to work with, at least in the beginning. And again, we can go back and update these as we discover more. So you would use specific measures. So you would use things like we want to increase invoice processing by 25%. We want to reduce unproductive time spent by the team by 15%. I'm using percentages, but you could say by resource or by system or by delivery date. So there's multiple measures you can do, and you will find lots of types of techniques that you can use in your BABAC guide, but don't be constrained by those either. Look at ways in which you would measure a project or at least a critical outcome of a project. Also think of costs in terms of wastes, revenue, reputation, money. One of the senior guys I worked with many years ago, he said, there's only 2 things that matter to senior management. And he said that's revenue and reputation. And he said, if you can make sure those things always remain really good quality, the rest of it we'll figure out. So that to me was quite important, because everybody understands revenue. They don't necessarily understand how to manage money, but that's important. But reputation is something that is one of those intangible measures that can really affect a business. All right, so I'm giving you an example, and this is where I want you to start thinking. So I would like you to provide me some information. Do you think that this is a good project goal, and why?
Righto, welcome to type your answers into the chat. So Dierdre, I just posted a question there prior to that, so we might get a little mix up here, because I asked what are their thoughts about revenue reputation. So we'll see what comes through. You want to just repeat your question there, Dierdre?
Is this a good goal? Is this written as a good critical success factor?
Letitia says smart. Letitia, maybe just
as in the technique.
Yeah. Donnell says asks, I think, define world class.
Haha.
Saying define.
Good on you.
Yes, yeah. Well done, Donnell. Michael says no measurable.
Correct.
Yeah. Ingrid says no timeline. Yep. Georgina also comes in with define world class. Caitlin says no specifics to define towards measurement. So there's a lot of come through measurements, so won't call them all out. Deirdre says rush to solution.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yay, we got some BAs in the room.
Must be all certified.
Yeah, must be. So well done. Yes, this is not a good or well-written project goal. So if you thought I was just going to give you the answers, you're incorrect. Firstly, I've highlighted the colors that have been mentioned in the kind of documentation. And I know documentation analysis is probably one of the most boring things you'll ever do in your life, unless you're one of those people who's a read-write. But, you can quickly see just by visualizing some of the key things is missing, that has been highlighted in the previous two documents. And absolutely, how do you define world-class? What does that mean? So it's important to define it. 100% agree. It's important. You can even go look at, industry standard, and you can use that. And that's why industry standard exists. So please don't be afraid to Google stuff. Just make sure that you've got solid sources. So again, as an investigative journalist, if you were interviewing someone that went, oh yes, we're world class, you would go, well, what do you mean by that? Like, what does world class mean to you? And how do you know that this business is world class, or how do you know that we can actually reach that goal of world class? So always put on that thinking hat to go, I'm not sure if this information is correct yet. And, not only look for holes, but look for opportunities as well. Look for things like, oh, okay, so this is what they're saying, but maybe we need to define it and help them a little bit more around what that world class means. And okay, we're fine with time, are we? Yes. All right, so just going back, we're going to look at our last part of our knowledge brief in part 1. Is the root cause analysis. Now, root cause analysis is such an important component of investigating something. If you go to the doctor and you say, I've got a headache, and the doctor goes, it's definitely you haven't slept well. Here's a pill. Now, I know that happens occasionally, but that wouldn't be a really good investigation, would it? And so you've got to think of, when somebody says, we need a CRM, or we need this new JDE needs to all be upgraded, you really need to understand what that problem is, what is the background, and why did this happen? So as an investigative journalist, you do something similar. You go, okay, so this is the situation that we've, discovered, and why is this important? Why is this happening? All right, let's go to the next thing. Okay, so how do we determine what the actual problem is? And there's multiple ways. You could use a tree, a root cause analysis. You could use a, iceberg. There are many ways in which you can visually represent a root cause analysis. But the truth of the matter is you can have to investigate something. And so with a root cause, you'll often find that there's not only one cause. And you've got to be able to tell the difference between a symptom and and let's say, what is the origin that we're working with? So I'm just thinking of an example, because when I was in the last session, I used the example of a dripping tap. So is the problem a dripping tap? I might use a different example. So if I say to you, I've got water dripping, let's say, onto my bed all of a sudden, what is the root of that problem?
So what do you think is the root cause of that dripping tap?
Mm.
Let's see your answers in the chat. The water. Thanks, Georgina. I'm thinking there could be a faulty washer.
Getting closer.
Debbie's saying, why is the water dripping?
Yes. So we have to find the source of that.
Yeah, Georgina says the water containment. Not sure what she means by that.
Yes, yes. Something's causing the water to go outside of its contained environment. And that, consequentially leads to the problem. Sorry, not the problem, the symptom. So water dripping is the symptom. That's not the problem. The problem is that we can't maintain the water within its current confinement. And so the water is getting out somewhere. So that's the problem. And when we do root cause analysis, we would have to go back through those pipes. We'd have to go and look to see, is it the tap? Is it the pipe? Is it the actual, let's say, heating system that maybe is sending the water too quickly and it's then causing erosion on the pipe? So maybe it's not the pipe that's the problem, but the volume of water that's coming through that has eroded it over time. So as you can see, the problem is that we don't have our water contained, not that there's a leak. The leak is the symptom of the problem that the water isn't contained. However, in order to do the root cause, we still need to go and investigate what might have stopped that water from being contained. Let me just go into the next slide. So this is the iceberg example. If you only focus on the tip, the next bit just rocks up again. I know it's not the best example. I do prefer the tree analogy, but this does give you some insight into that. So, and obviously I've been using the water dripping as the issue. So we do need to, when we look at our problem statement, when we look at our background statement, we need to look at how we actually word these things, because that can eventually lead to a project that goes in a completely wrong direction. If it's, we have water dripping and then somebody goes, we'll put a plug, above the bed so that we can make sure that the water doesn't drip. That's not helpful in any way, because that's not solving the problem. But if we frame it to say that the water isn't contained and these are the key areas that have been affected by this, because we've broken it down into several factors, and actually let me open this up, we will have a better understanding of what the what the problem is, what the solution is that we want to solve, and frame our requirements correctly. Because I certainly believe that in business we don't do well enough in framing our projects, framing our solutions, and providing information that is helpful. And this is why it's called the knowledge brief, after all. So there's multiple techniques that you can use. You've got the appreciative inquiry, where you would ask a series of, so someone would say, this is what's the problem, so what? And you would look at a whole bunch of consequences, or somebody would say, this is the answer, and then you say, so what? So I usually find that this doesn't work very well. It depends on which team you're working with. The 5 whys Also, this can be challenging because people often think that you are challenging them and not the problem. So you have to be very careful with the whys. So some of the tricks, so even though the technique should be used, some of the tricks I use would be, or could you explain that? I'm not quite sure what you mean. Could you dive in a bit deeper rather than just asking them why, like a 3-year-old, because it can drive anyone nuts. It drives the mother nuts, so you can imagine. The other one is a drill down. So you drill down into smaller and smaller details, which is similar to this water leaking, which is our problem. Our water isn't contained, and now we're going to drill down to see where is the source of that problem, and also how that water is or should be contained. We also want to measure it over time, so we don't just want to go, oh, this pipe is eroded, we must replace the pipe. We want to understand, if there was too much water pressure going in, is that the actual problem that we're solving? And therefore, we still need to replace the pipe, but that's just one step in the process. And then your cause and effect diagram, or your fishbone diagram, looks at the problem, and again, this needs to be well defined. And so our water isn't contained in its normal structure. And then we have to look at all of the potential causes that could relate to this. I do say to BAs that you can actually break down what would be, and we talk about the 14 requirements in the knowledge brief, the 14 high-level business requirements. You can also, even though this is what is used for fishbone exercise, you can actually put any block here if you want. You don't have to be constrained by this. So if you want to put in data, if you want to put in any of the other ones, that's fine. What you're trying to do is you're trying to investigate the problem. So these cover a lot. So you could probably fit it all in here, but you also don't want to constrain yourself by your investigation. So here's a quick example of the 5 whys, where you would look at, what is the issue that you're dealing with? Why has this happened? Why? And you eventually end up with some logical outcome. And hopefully that will be, an aha moment for the people that you work with. And BAs, you have to be realistic about all of this. So I don't know, I can't see who's in the group. Is it Georgina Block?
That's correct.
Ha! That chicka is a master at this stuff. So waiting to hear from her.
Pretty early for Georgina.
So yeah, just text Georgina if you want to know how to do a root cause analysis. So whatever technique that you use, it doesn't come quickly. This is something that you have to learn over time. It's not, if you haven't done root cause analysis, if you haven't been coached on it, if you haven't worked in a team to really figure this out, or even just go for training or anything, it won't come to you immediately. And I've seen this happen with a lot of BAs. I was one of these myself, so I can hand on heart say it's a process that you go through and that you have to get used to. So it's going to leave us 5 minutes. We're running a little bit late. But in essence, this is part 1 of your knowledge brief. As I said, you can write this on a presentation, and the amount of information that I provided would be sufficient. You can always have supporting information. And so depending on your audience, depending on your level of abstraction, you can provide simple information in a dashboard, in a presentation, and use it, easily, across the organization. So that's your investigative journalist. Hope you've discovered what your business problem is and what your solution might be. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Deirdre, for that. And please, people, if you've got any questions, there we go, a couple of hands. There we go. If you've got any questions, please pop them in the chat, and we've got about 7 minutes. We probably can go a minute or two over time. But Deirdre, I was just thinking in terms of some of the stuff that's coming up in part 2 and part 3. What can we expect? And by the way, people, we haven't set the dates for that. So, but just watch out for it. The emails will go out as soon as we've set the dates for that.
I'm a busy lady. Yeah.
Yes, she's a busy lady. Okay.
Okay, so part 2 is really around understanding the current state and looking at what requirements might be around the stakeholders. And then part 3, we're looking at what are the next steps. So we want to know what the future state might look like, what investment we'd have to do, into that. And so part 2, that's part 3. So part 2, we would look at high-level business requirements and then drill them down by level of abstraction into user stories. So that would be the idea with the next parts. I'm not sure exactly. I know we've got the big conference on in June. So there's been a couple of things, but I'm hoping we will, between June and July, be able to get part 2 and 3 live for you.
Yes, awesome. I have a question that it actually came up in the chat while you're talking, and it's around benefits analysis.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I find often missing from analysis work is actually telling our stakeholders what the benefits of that, and how does that fit into the problem statement in the background, well, not the background statement, but the problem statement and the root cause analysis.
In part 3, we talk about recommendations. Are you just laughing now?
You've got to come back, people.
So we don't want to jump into a recommendation, when we're trying to understand the background and the context. But this is a very important part of being a BA. If you want to make a change in the organization, you want people to remember you, use your recommendation wisely. Because if you are making a recommendation to your audience, whether that be at a high level or whatever level you're working in the project, make sure you've done your research. It's like you don't want to publish a paper as an investigative journalist and you haven't, checked your sources. So, yes, we do deal with that in part 3.
Okay, so there you have it. You have to come back for part 2 and part 3 to find the answer to that question. Caitlin has a question. What is the best advice you've ever been given for the start of a project or a program?
Probably, I've been given a lot of good advice, but probably I would say is observation. Start with observing. One of the things that we did as a team was to go and meet different people, to just get to know them, get to know who you're working with. Again, as an investigator, you don't want to just start writing requirements. I mean, that would be crazy, right? You wouldn't do that. But as as somebody who's going to go and meet the potential stakeholders and understand the background a little bit better, that's what you'd be doing.
I agree 100% with that. And I think even in context of this presentation, understanding the problems you're going to solve is a good start to your project, because then that will guide your requirements as you go forward. Michael Kane has a question. He says, how are you differentiating between benefits from your success measures?
You might have to elaborate. I'm not sure I understand the question.
Exactly. If I can kind of answer that might help you the way I see it. And Michael, please correct me if I'm wrong. But for me, success measures are more around the project and the product. How will we know that we have a successful product? How will we know we have a successful project? Whereas benefits is what is the value that your project is going to deliver to the organization.
Yeah, I think that's a fair description.
Okay, cool. Great stuff. the question I was thinking about during the presentation is that jargon and terminology. And I also, because I've worked in client sites where I've come on as a senior BA, and I've even been blown away, like, what does this word mean, in the context and all of that. So in terms of what we're talking about today, what's your thoughts and advice in terms of using jargon?
Don't. That's my thought. Look, I mean, this is why I use the case of investigative journalist. No one's going to read your paper if they don't know. I mean, who reads doctorate level, papers? I mean, you might do it to see if you can manage it, but if you're not in that, well, the fancy word is discourse, you won't understand, what it is that you're dealing with. So you want to be able to deal with the people in a way as if you are writing an article that somebody can read. So, like I say, write something worth reading. So using jargon is not going to help anyone. You might have to use an acronym or two, like you don't want to say, customer relationship management. You can just put a bracket and say CRM and then never have to use that term again. But it's horrible. I don't know if you've ever been in an organization where they throw in all these acronyms and you have no idea what they mean, and you're like, I'm not going to ask because I don't want to sound like the dumb nut in the company. So don't do it to others, and don't be afraid to ask what they mean by acronyms.
I love Debbie's little comment, jargon. And Deidre says government is the world of acronyms for Africa. Yeah, definitely that. So listen, I think we're gonna call. Oh, here goes my voice. We're gonna call it there. I know that everyone's time is precious. Watch out for emails that will come out in the next day or two, just with links to the recording to this webinar. And I'll put in some of the links that we've actually talked about during the webinar, so to Deidre's website and also to the Festival Business Analysis and upcoming webinars. And there will also be a little survey, so you can actually tell me how well Deborah.
Damn, you better be nice.
We like to get feedback on and to help our speakers and also for us to understand what topics to bring forward. So everyone, thank you very much for attending. Thank you, Deidre, once again for stepping in and bringing an interesting topic to us. And thank you, everyone.
Pleasure.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
All righty.